story has a happy ever after. And after this story, there's an after party.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Happy Ever After Party. I'm your host, Sam Longston. And for this episode, I am by myself. Amanda's going to be joining me in the next episode or two. And while we wait for her, I wanted to talk about a couple of adaptations of Hansel and Gretel before seeing the new film, 2020's Gretel and Hansel. I thought this would be a good time to talk about adaptation, since it's something we discuss so much in Once Upon a Time. Once Upon a Time is unique because it does adaptation in several ways. Usually for a movie or a TV show, when there's an adaptation of a fairy tale or mythology or religion, it tends to just be either a change in setting, a change in the plot, a change in characters, but still keeping the overall story. And Once Upon a Time keeps the story of these characters, but it usually changes the plot and then changes the plot and setting again. So we talked about Cinderella being such a good adaptation in Once Upon a Time. And that's because both the adaptation in the fairy tale world and in Storybrooke worked so well. So when we're talking about adapting, what I tend to look for is the main beats of the story being met, regardless of what actually happens in the show or the movie. So what do I talk about first? Well, I think I should start with the 2013 Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters movie. I've mentioned that it was produced by Will Ferrell. It was also directed by Tommy Wirkola, who directed both Dead Snow and the sequel, Dead Snow, Dead vs. Red. I've not seen the sequel, but I did see the first Dead Snow. And if I told you that this was a movie about zombie Nazis, it's pretty much the film that you have in your head right now. But it is so fun, and I highly recommend watching it if you're a fan of zombie or horror films. And this movie is certainly so fun to watch. To give you a very brief rundown of the movie without getting into spoilers first, it's about Hansel and Gretel when they're grown up becoming professional witch hunters. And the movie takes place with them picking up a job in a town near the place they grew up, where 11 children are missing, and they're hired to find the witch or witches responsible for it. All the while discovering that a big Sabbath is approaching for something called the Blood Moon, which I will get into in a little bit. This isn't so much a fantasy movie so much as it is an action film, and that is not a bad thing. From here on out, consider this a spoiler alert. I'm not necessarily going to do a beat-by-beat recap of the film, but I am going to talk about major plot points that happen and how they directly relate to the original fairy tale and a couple of other fairy tales and mythologies. Starting with the first 10 minutes of the movie, before the credits start rolling, we see young Hansel and Gretel being left in the woods by their father. The father gives no explanation, but it's very clear that both of the parents had the idea to send them out into the woods for some reason. And it's clear that it's not a selfish reason either. In the original fairy tale, it's the father who decides to leave the children out in the woods. And in later revisions of the Brothers Grimm tale, they added the element of the mother forcing the father to leave the children in the woods. And that's kind of what we see in the movie here. Although, as the film goes on, we know that it's for a good reason and not an insidious one. When the children are left in the woods, they do stumble upon the candy house and start eating it. The doors fly open, magic stuff happens, and the witch pops out in a not so scary jump scare, but the reveal of her makeup is pretty rad. And she is instantly ugly and wicked and starts force-feeding Hansel. In the original tale, she doesn't necessarily force-feed them right away. They go into the house and they start eating, and she's kind of sweet towards them first, until she eventually captures Hansel and forces Gretel to chop wood and get the oven hot to boil the now fat Hansel. So the film basically starts off the same way that the story does. We hear the entire fairy tale in a very condensed, neatly formatted way, which being thrown into the oven and all. We get a little bit of narration from Jeremy Renner, talking about how this was the point in their life that changed them forever and they became professional witch hunters. I'm, of course, paraphrasing. Jeremy is nice enough to let us know that the best way to get rid of a witch is to set her ass on fire. I don't know if you can consider voiceovers to be one-liners, but if you can, it's a pretty decent one. The movie's full of much better one-liners as it goes on, including them re-encountering the candy house, with Hansel and Gretel seeing it at different points. Each time one of them sees it, they say, "You gotta be fucking kidding me." A great one-liner in any action film, and it never gets old. Now, bringing up the fact that the witch was ugly right from the get-go is something that's brought up for, I'll say, maybe the first third of the film. This idea that you can spot a witch very easily because of how ugly they are, because of how rotted their teeth and skin look. The film really wants us to hold on to this concept, and this is something that you can see from coming a mile away, that of course there are witches who look good or are able to disguise themselves to look good. The difference between the two we'll discuss in a little bit. In the original tale, the witch that lured Hansel and Gretel in doesn't necessarily need to change her appearance, because the glamour, the trickery from this witch was in the candy house. The film needs a little bit more substance to it, so the addition of different kinds of witches and the ability to shapeshift does add tension, even though you can probably tell who is a witch fairly early on after this revelation, and maybe even a little bit before that. It's fine. It's fine. This isn't the film that you need to sit down and be very nitpicky with, because it's an action film. And it's an action film that knows that it's supposed to be fun. This is the candy house. It's junk food for your brain. And I say that in a very loving way. I don't mind being a Hansel or Gretel and being lured in for this candy house for my brain. It's bright, it's shiny. The settings and the special effects for the witches, even though they're supposed to be ugly, are really well crafted. The special effects team really went out of their way to make all the witches look like something that you would see in a book. There's a giant coven that assembles towards the end of all of the quote-unquote bad witches. And, I mean, you see things that you would see in something like The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. You would also see things that are kind of Silent Hill-y. Silent Hill-y? Yeah, I'm sticking with that. So people really had fun with the aesthetic of the story of Hansel and Gretel. I'd even go as far as to say that the aesthetic drives the film. And that's a really good thing, because when you let such a vivid, well-known story shape the world of your film, you can have so much fun with it. and it's not pretentious in any way, shape, or form. It's also well thought out in the ways that matter. So we're talking about the witches. The story makes a point to differentiate between black magic and white magic, very reminiscent of Gardenian Wiccan, if anybody is well read in that. But just the notion that not all witches use their magic for evil or to harm humans. There is a witch in here who uses white magic, and I think that it's no coincidence that she has this long, flowy, wavy, reddish hair. Not like a bad witch who has like this candy apple red hair, but it looks like Glinda from The Wizard of Oz. So I think the film is really having fun using imagery from other films as well as from Hansel and Gretel to let us know this is a good witch, this is a bad witch. It's really easy to, pick these out. So even though there's this whole plot of Hansel and Gretel having to come to terms with not all witches are bad, and you could argue that there's a gray area, the movie still kind of keeps things literally black and white for the sake of the audience to just sit back, relax, and have fun. Now, I said that this movie makes references to other stories besides Hansel and Gretel, and I want to take a minute to talk about some of those nods. Some of them are fairly obvious. Hansel and Gretel end up getting a little sidekick who at one point offers Gretel a bowl of porridge, and upon delivering it to her says, not too hot, not too cold, just right. Obviously being from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So the film can be very tongue-in-cheek in that regard. There's also really bizarre references that are in the film. One that I was really blown away by, and I don't even know if this was intentional or not, but the main witch, who is very hot and played by Femke Janssen, says, I have gone by many names, none of which you are worthy of pronouncing. This stuck with me because of the many powers that the bad witches had. They're able to use mind control on people and literally make people go insane. And I can't help but thinking that the combination of names that humans are not able to or not worthy to pronounce, or upon which going crazy, it screams Lovecraft to me. It's little details like that that kind of elevate this film from just being another dumb action movie. This was really well crafted, and I think little nods like that really make it worth rewatching. And besides more specific fairy tales or mythos, it also references a grimoire, which again, if you're familiar with Gardenian Wiccan, all witches have their own grimoires. And this one happens to give them the directions on how to make medieval Tommy guns, grenades, and huge, huge shotguns. With Evil Dead and Army of Darkness, we get the Necronomicon, and in this book, we get medieval steampunk witches anarchist cookbook. If I haven't said it by now, this film is absolutely fun. And one of the things that make it work is the fact that it's anachronistic. There are things in this movie that if we were given a specific time, it wouldn't really be funny and it really wouldn't stick out. Most of the film has a very steampunk kind of aesthetic, and we see a lot of steampunk things in it. I'd mentioned the medieval Tommy gun. There's also a very anachronistic record player that's used to trick a witch into thinking that there's a child lost in the woods. And just the way it looks, it's very, clumsily put together and retrofitted to make look like a gramophone, even though it's obviously not supposed to be a gramophone. there's also things in this movie that really make me laugh. Probably the two details that really it made me know that the people putting this together were having fun was a vendor in the town is selling jugs of breast milk for people to give to their children. And the milk jugs have illustrations of children who are gone missing. This is the medieval equivalent of missing child posters on milk cartons. And the fact that somebody thought of this, made it, and put it on film is fucking brilliant. Part of the movie that when I first watched it made me fall in love with it has to do with Jeremy Renner's Hansel. Remember, he is the one that the witch ensnared and wanted to fatten up and eat first. This meant he had to eat a shit ton of candy. As a result, there are several scenes where, in medieval, again, very steampunky, watch alarm goes off every couple of hours, and Jeremy Renner's Hansel needs to inject himself. And we are never told what is in that injection. It's just called medicine. And we are never told what sickness he has. But he goes on a monologue explaining that he got this sickness from being force-fed so much candy. Guys, Hansel has diabetes. If you want to make a really good adaptation of any source material, you need to think about real ramifications for fantastical events. And this is perfect. Hansel with diabetes and glass milk jugs with missing kid illustrations is the kind of attention to detail in an adaptation that I hope to see as often as possible when I discuss films and TV like this. Once Upon a Time doesn't get nearly this creative. Sometimes it can as far as characters go. But for little tiny plot details like this is gold. This is why I do Happy Ever After Party. It's for these little moments like this. As far as adaptations go, this was a really good one to do. I'm going to take a quick pause before getting back to finishing up my thoughts about Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, and also getting into a kind of sort of adaptation. You'll see what I mean when I get back. The Tinfoil Rabbit Hole is a unique storytelling experience with distinctive presentation and sly style. Stephen, as the White Rabbit, pushes the boundaries of the narrative docuspiracy shows by digging deep into the rabbit hole of the internet to bring you stories from around the world and beyond, fact or fiction, true or false, believable or unbelievable. The slightly offbeat production is a unique narrative that will draw you deep into the rabbit hole every week. You can listen to the Tinfoil Rabbit Hole on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, InsensitiveNetwork.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we are back. So Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters is an amazing movie. I could talk about this film a little bit longer, but like I've said before, my aim isn't to do total recaps of the movies. I like to dissect them for the adaptation. Although I do want to briefly mention that the movie has a plot point revolving around the blood moon. The blood moon is in reference to a lunar eclipse, a total lunar eclipse that's the last in a series of 4 that takes place in the span of 6 lunar months. The name blood moon used to describe this phenomenon wasn't used until 2013, the same date that this movie was released. I thought that was a little interesting bit of trivia, but beyond that, I don't really want to focus too much on this movie, and I want to talk about another adaptation of Hansel and Gretel, known as Freeway 2, Confessions of a Trickbaby. I'm not going to be spending as much time talking about this one as I did Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, mostly because what there is to talk about in terms of adaptation is pretty weak, and this movie's batshit insane. Buckle in your seatbelts. I call this an almost adaptation because, like other adaptations, you can find the beats of the original fairy tale in here, but in order to do that, you have to sit through all the tropes of an exploitation movie, which tends to mean that plot takes a back seat. If you've never seen the first movie, it's a very loose adaptation of Little Red Riding Hood, but with prostitution rigs. And Freeway 2, Confessions of a Trickbaby, is Hansel and Gretel, where Hansel and Gretel are not brother and sister. They are queer women convicts on the run from the police. And instead of breadcrumbs, they have crack cocaine. And instead of the witch, we have a nun, a very eccentric, evil nun. I've never had to do this before on Happy Ever After Party, but I'm going to have to go through a list of trigger warnings. Let me cue up some relaxing music. Okay, so I'm not trying to make light of what can make other people upset. I'm just going to play some soothing music in the background to help us get through what can otherwise be an unpleasant conversation. I want to start off with listing some of the things that people may find disturbing about this movie. Drug use, bulimia, pedophilia, incest, cannibalism, murder, lots of it, necrophilia by proxy, implied sex work of minors, those under the age of 18, both in terms of pornography and prostitution. So, those are some of the more unpleasant things people might find in this movie, but to reiterate, this is an exploitation film. I can imagine if you've never seen the first movie that this may be a bit of a shock to you, but exploitations are pretty few and far between these days, so whenever you do get one, circa 2000s or the 2010s, they tend to be pretty over the top and cram a lot into one movie. I'm not going to necessarily mention the queer undertones of this movie, or overtones, I should say, or just the theme of prostitution itself as a negative, because here on Happy Ever After Party, we are queer positive folks. We are sex work positive folks. We are not going to shame anyone for how they make money, who they love, and more importantly, we're not going to critique it in a fictional sense unless there's something that's very problematic. So, some of the sex work or things related to sex work in this movie are problematic, but we're not actually going to go ahead and shame the act of sex work itself. And we are definitely not shaming the queer under overtones in this movie for very obvious reasons. If you've never seen the It Chapter 2 review that I did by myself, I've made it pretty explicitly clear that I myself am a queer person. So if that's something that bothers you or triggers you, you know where the pause button is. You can go ahead and skip the rest of this review. Give me a second to get down off my soapbox here. Okay. So, the things being exploited in this movie, it makes it very difficult to talk about. I also couldn't find a good copy of this movie, and I couldn't really find it on any of the streaming services that I had. So what clips I was able to see, because I have watched this movie in the past before, but I wasn't able to re-watch it in its entirety for the sake of talking about it and talking about adaptation. When you are working with a very loose framework that's working on the skeleton of a story, what do you really need? What is the most important part of a fairy tale for you to build your exploitation film around? Well, I guess that means diving into the topic of what's the difference between the story and the plot. Is there a difference between the two? Well, yeah, there's a pretty big difference between the two. The story of any movie or TV show or book is the framework. It is everything that enables the plot to happen. The plot is the mechanics of the story. It's the nitty-gritty details. It's the actual very specific events that happen in it. It's the moving parts that make the clock work. The story is the case holding the clock. So what's important about Hansel and Gretel? Well, you have two kids that are abandoned by their family, are picked up by a strange or other ostracized entity that wishes to corrupt them in some way, shape, or form for the entity's own personal gain. And in the end, the kids come out victorious because of their adaptability. Ultimately, Hansel and Gretel is a story about overcoming trauma. So, if you look at it in that sense, having it be an exploitation film actually is pretty practical. So instead of having a brother and sister being left in the woods by their parents, you have two women who ended up in a very high-profile prison. Both of them had a history of sexual abuse as children. One of them ends up developing an eating disorder because of it. The other one just is kind of what I can basically only describe as Hollywood borderline personality disorder. You know, the kind of depiction of craziness that Hollywood never actually likes to dive into and discuss. So, in a sense, these are two women who are very much abandoned by society and of their families. So you don't have to literally be abandoned by your parents to have that same kind of story take place. And as far as the film going into detail about the two women having sex with each other, and the one making two different references on being related, she disguises herself in plaid and a hat and insists that she can pose as the other woman's little brother. And after they have sex, she says, "Well, I guess this kind of makes us related now." Okay, film, you didn't need to do that. I appreciate it, but I think the whole past child trauma was good enough to make your point. I'm not complaining about the lesbian sex, though. That was fantastic. I guess I need to talk about the witch in question. The witch being a maybe Catholic nun, although it's definitely kind of like a mixture of Catholicism and Santeria. Sister Gomez, played by Vince Gallo, director of The Brown Bunny. So, it's not really known until the end of the movie that Sister Gomez is either supposed to be trans or intersex. I'm not really sure what the movie's angle with that was supposed to be. But in terms of being an exploitation film, I understand the purpose of that happening. In terms of it being an adaptation of Hansel and Gretel, for the witch to be born as male and present as female, that could actually be an allusion to the practices of either accusing women with birthmarks or deformities as being wicked, or probably more likely the practice of burning men who were thought to be homosexual or somehow sexually deviant, as well as women who were accused of witches. Part of the reason why the word faggot is used to describe gay men has to do with how originally, as people like to point out, faggot means a bundle of sticks. Well, when men were also accused of witchcraft for either homosexual acts or sexually deviant acts, they were not burned in large public squares. No. They were burned with these smaller bundles of kindling. It wasn't as much of a spectacle because they didn't want to, they basically didn't want to promote the idea of why this person was being executed, for fear that people would know that these actions exist. That's one of the reasons why, faggot is a slur, and why to a lot of people it's still a very hurtful one. So I think the movie wasn't this smart. I don't think it was, but it is something very interesting to think about. Unlike Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters, which basically took the aesthetic of Hansel and Gretel and really let it drive the narrative, this movie used references so that it had something resembling a plot. Again, it really takes the skeleton of two kids going through something really traumatic in a literal sense and in a very fantastical sense. Because the film needed to have something resembling a plot. It needed to move forward somehow. You can't just make a movie with lesbian sex in it and release it into theaters unless there's a plot surrounding it. Otherwise, you just release it on Pornhub. And either way, I am fine with it. But I think that there's a lot easier ways for you to have lesbian sex scenes. Black Swan, I am looking at you. Anyway, I didn't want to talk too much about this movie just because, like I said, it's really using just the bare bones framework of Hansel and Gretel in order to tell this exploitation story, which I'm fine with. To me, even though it's an incredibly loose adaptation, it's still an adaptation. I don't think I could ever compare Once Upon a Time to Freeway 2, Confessions of a Trickbaby, but I might pull it out for future episodes. I think there's a very strong case to be made about exploitation in the realms of fairy tale creations. Did I like this movie? Well, when I first saw it, I thought it was pretty epic. It's not going to be a film for everybody. A lot of people don't like exploitation films, but like I've said with Amanda before, I'm fond of cheesy movies. I'm fond of monster movies where you can still see the zipper on the costume. I like movies like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill that really don't make a whole lot of sense, but you just sit back, relax, and let the movie take you where you want to go. And yeah, I like movies like Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunter, which are just really dumb action movies, but that take a lot of pride in their aesthetic. There's nothing wrong with that. And if there's something out there that makes you happy, you go ahead and watch it. You don't have to have a plot for your lesbian sex, but you know what? If you enjoy movies that do that for you, go ahead and watch it. You know you have my support. Well, this took a very interesting turn, and I don't know if watching these movies are going to give me any kind of additional framework for watching the new Gretel and Hansel movie. From what I can tell, the new movie is the same setting, pretty much the same plot, pretty much the same story, but it just has a change in the point of view. So we'll see what exactly that means and how exactly it makes the movie more interesting or less interesting. I don't know. Stay tuned to find out how I felt about it. I'd like to take some time to thank Insensitive Network for hosting Happy Ever After Party. There's a couple of different platforms where you can listen to us now. If you want to check out iTunes, you can leave a review for us. You can rate it. Let me know what you think or what you'd like to hear. We're also on Spotify, Google Play Music, YouTube, both on Insensitive Network's channel and Happy Ever After Party's own channel. You can even still go on insensitivenetwork.com and listen to Happy Ever After Party right there. Be sure to check out some of the other podcasts that are on there too, including Totally Insensitive Podcast and The Tinfoil Rabbit Hole. And good news, Amanda is going to be coming back to join me. I don't know if it's going to be before or after I post the new Hansel and Gretel movie review, but she'll be back and we'll be talking about Once Upon a Time episode 5. Is she going to take that poisoned comb out of her hair? I have no idea. You have to tune in to find out. So, in the meantime, might not be the end, might not be happy, but you're always welcome to this party. Take care.